And thanks so much for staying with us. Presidential hopeful Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma hit out at billionaire Johan Rupert for his anti-radical economic transformation utterances. Addressing the funeral in Daba in Durban, Dlamini-Zuma says Johan Rupert's statements are an insult to black people. Rupert equated a radical economic transformation to an organized theft. The ANC presidential hopeful says it's insulting to describe radical economic transformation as a code word for looting, while the majority of South Africans remain on the borderline of the economy. Dlamini-Zuma says, and I quote, "I heard that somebody said that a radical economic transformation is just theft. This is an insult to all black people. We must reject this. We must all commit to radical economic transformation," end quote. And on the sidelines of the Richmond's annual general meeting in Geneva last week, Rupert says, and I quote, "Radical economic transformation is just a code word for theft. That's what's happening there. They're raiding the state's coffers and it's public knowledge," end quote. And the structures of the African National Congress slammed Johan Rupert for his comments. The ANC says Rupert's arrogant condemnation of the important discussion about economic transformation in our country betrays his ill-gotten privilege. The ANC Women's League hit out and said Mr. Rupert has finally come out to display his white arrogance, and Rupert and cohorts must live with the radical economic transformation. And the ANC Youth League called on Rupert to apologize for derogatory remarks on the radical economic transformation. Joining us in studio, Group Political Editor Sfiso Mahlangu Botsangwelwa joins us again, a political analyst. Mosiritsiane is with the South African Liberty Foundation as their chairperson. He's also with Mosiritsiane and attorneys. Carl Niehaus, MKMVA NEC member, join us via Skype. And Thabo Mutle, ANC Youth League NEC member, is on the line. Good evening, gentlemen, and thanks so much for joining us. What do you make now with the presidential hopeful feeling the need to have to respond to what Johan Rupert was quoted as saying? I'll start with you, Sfiso.
Good evening to you and good evening to all your viewers. It's very interesting indeed that Ms. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma feels the need, she feels entirely compelled to respond. In a way and in a sense, this was a slam and a hit and a jibe against her and her campaign. You do remember that her campaign is themed or titled Radical Economic Transformation Now. So any jibe against the radical economic transformation does deal with her presidential ambitions. But I think it also deals with the matter of suffering for many, many South Africans. I think the reason why it should be radical economic transformation is because not much transformation was done. That's why it has to be radical. Her statement also, though, we must admit, was just a statement. What can be done to Mr. Johan Rupert? Exactly. He practically owns the South African economy. He has particular ministers who report to him. Let's define that also as state capture. He has banks that he's in serious partnerships with. The food you eat is controlled from his study room. The garments one wears in this country comes from his shareholding deals. So what can you do with a statement against such a man as this? And I think he feels entitled to say these things against Africans, to say this is just a way to commit crimes. This is just thievery in its highest. So obviously he believes that anything that empowers black people, such as radical economic transformation, is theft. So obviously he feels that anyone who wants to stand up against white monopoly capital, who wants to stand for land expropriation without compensation, commits a crime.
Yeah, and you raise a very serious point, Sfiso, in the sense that in the room, the ambience and the investors that are there, these are like-minded people that think things in South Africa are actually not that bad, and black people are very simplistic in their demands. We just want a four-roomed house, an RDP, and the ability to commute, take a taxi and come and work in suburbia.
Yeah. I'm not a racist, I've got many black friends, or I'm not a racist, my children have many black friends. I'm not a racist, I've had Janos Tembiso, who's been my gardener for 14 years, and I've paid him every month, and I call him Ste. So how do you suggest that I'm a racist, I pay my taxes? So the reality is there is institutionalized racism, and the ability for one like Mr. Rupert to believe that radical economic transformation is not necessary. That's an insult. But to actually believe that it's a crime actually suggests to white people in this country, keep your wealth, keep your ill-gotten wealth, and if black people try to contest with that, they are committing a crime. I think his statement should be deemed very serious and rejected with the contempt it deserves.
Yeah.
You know, Cindy, if I may just come in, actually yourself and Skis and Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma are still even lenient to reduce this to radical economic transformation. The arrogance of land thieves and apartheid era benefactors like Johan Rupert should be crushed and approached in an arrogant manner, equally so. What we should be able to communicate to Johan Rupert is radical economic transformation is actually trying to bring black people into the same level at par or equal to white people, the way the apartheid government has created people like Johan Rupert. It is not addressing a fundamental issue that what Johan Rupert and other majority white people own and have was actually ill-gotten, was illegally received, and they murdered black people to can own what they have. So it's very arrogant for somebody like him to actually tell the government and the people of South Africa to say, when we want to transform the economy in this country to can fit the population demographics, then he calls it theft. When everything he owns was actually acquired through theft, through murder, through atrocities of apartheid. And if the government, you know, the ANC to release a statement and Dr. Dlamini-Zuma to release a statement to say he must apologize on that, we shouldn't do that to the people like Johan Rupert. We all know that Johan Rupert, a few months ago, he was owing the province of Mpumalanga and the city council of Mbombela municipality rates and taxes. We should take that land from people like Johan Rupert to show that we are not stealing. He is owning everything that was stolen from African black people. And this is actually very arrogant for him to challenge a simple thing like radical economic transformation. We should be talking about expropriation without compensation. We should be talking about repossession. We need government intervention.
Constitution.
The land in this country, Cindy, was not taken within the confines of the law. And white people for 23 years in this country have failed to give back or to share the land within the confines of the law. What do we still expect as a nation? Do you think people like Johan Rupert will wake up one day and say, I own 35 hectares of land and I want to share it with 34 people? It is not going to happen. We have to actually force them as a nation to share in that land. If they don't want to share, we have to rise and say, but we will take back what rightfully belongs to the African people and the land. And that's what makes him arrogant, because they created the laws which are governing us today. They have manipulated, as we have said, and they own some of cabinet ministers who are pushing some of their policies. They control them, they own the banking sector, they own everything in the country. If we don't stand up as a nation and revolt against these people and take what rightfully belongs to the people.
How do we take it beyond, you know,
it cannot be done through paperwork, office work, and boardrooms. We failed as a nation to do that. They failed as white people to show remorse and reconciliation. And it's not going to happen. We are smoking a pipe dream.
Yeah. So Botsang says we're quite charitable, hoping that one day maybe Mr. Johan Rupert will apologize.
Never.
We know that he is a third, fourth generation heir of a billion enterprise or dynasty. You know, owning Swiss company, Richemont, and the luxury goods company, etc. He's not interested. I'm probably thinking one of the least concerns he has is that transformation will take place in this country. How can our viewers or South Africans, primarily black, believe that this RET is a reality?
I think what we need to know is that particularly the ANC election that is coming on at the end of the year, it's critical. It is the do or die moment for South Africa, particularly the blacks, that this is a time to either move forward or remain stagnant and the status quo remains the same, or things must change. It is clear that those that are having within themselves and have amassed the wealth of this country want to hold things as they are. They don't want this change. And not only does it come out from people like Johan Rupert, but it comes also from the people within the ANC. Now, why attack those that have come along all along, we've heard that Nkosazana has been singing the song and has been making radical economic transformation her way of campaigning within the ANC. But we haven't heard the other candidate. We haven't heard that. Never touched that line, never say that there must be radical economic transformation because you don't want to hurt your friends. We can't ignore that. Now, it is clear that this is an absolute instance where we've got to make choice, and South Africa must put their eyes and hope in Nkosazana Zuma, making sure that radical economic transformation comes in her tenure.
Yeah, Mr. House, MKMVA NEC member, why is radical economic transformation generally a good thing for South Africans?
Well, I wouldn't just say it's a good thing. I would say it's absolutely essential. Because without radical economic transformation, without changing the power dynamics of the economy and empowering the majority of black people, especially African people, there is going to be a continuation of the current situation of exploitation. There's going to be a continuation of the arrogance of white monopoly capital as it is articulated by Mr. Johan Rupert. You know, Cindy, we must understand that Johan Rupert's father, Anton Rupert, was one of the greatest benefactors of apartheid. And he was also one of the biggest sponsors of apartheid. The wealth that Johan Rupert had, stolen from the black majority of South Africans. And this man is an arrogant person who insulted black people, and that is exactly what Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma said last night. She didn't ask for him to apologize. She wasn't mild on him. She said it is an insult to black people which should be resisted to the fullest extent. And that resistance must include the empowerment of the majority of black people. Radical economic transformation must include the land restitution without compensation, a total change in the dynamics of our financial system, especially our banks and our insurance companies, and very importantly, a change for our Reserve Bank so that the Reserve Bank will in fact serve the policies of the African National Congress government, and especially the policies that is there to empower black majority in South Africa. Radical economic transformation, as Dr. Nkosazana Zuma's slogan says, is not a nicety. It is an essential part for the future of South Africa, and it is quite right to say it is now or never.
All right, Mr. Mahlangu, just how Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, in the context of her campaign line, radical economic transformation, she would also have the task of having to separate what the likes of Johan Rupert, their narrative of trying to suggest that this is a gravy train for all to loot and further corrupt the state and erode what the country has.
I would like to spend some time and perhaps attempt to educate Mr. Rupert. And perhaps like some other South Africans, he thinks that the definition or the broader spectrum of radical economic transformation is taking white people out of the banks and taking them out of, sectors and replacing them with black people. And that is not radical economic transformation. We should be able to define the difference between policy and polity. Radical economic transformation must deal first with a policy issue. And I think that's where Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma has it right. In a policy framework, it means that the banking laws must change in this country. So it's not just about filling up the banks with black people. Because even if we do that, unless the policies in the banking sector in this country change and start serving the majority, we haven't heard a difference. Unless the land policies change, and unless, the broader spectrum of policies so far as the economy is concerned change, unless we address the policies of the South African Reserve Bank, talk about ownership, who owns the Reserve Bank and why those families now live in Germany, why black people are not a part of it, why the gold is still living in England there when South Africans are struggling with free education? Those questions must be asked. So for someone sitting in their, in their billion rand estate, they just say, oh, well, this is an opportunity for black people to loot. Radical economic transformation in policy terms is not just about color. It's a broader definition to say we must change the policies. And I really like in Adventure what Nkosazana Dlamini said about a week ago, when she said radical economic transformation will even benefit white people. Because in essence, when blacks continue to suffer, black people in this country then have a gripe and an issue of hatred towards the ones that they see as rich. So it's time to spread the rand and to say, well, the whole framework, the policy needs to change. We don't want to remove white people, she was saying, but you're saying we want to spread the rand so that all can live in peace and harmony. And I think that point is very valid. But when you've been living in a white haven and everything you ever have, you've received with false intentions, black people have always served you. You don't see them as credible leaders. You don't even see them as people for that matter. It's very difficult to see a situation where you can live with them, where they can own what you own.
Or even advance their aspirations.
Where they can live where you live. I think that's the disparity. Many, many white people in this country, particularly the likes of Mr. Rupert, don't see that black people can live where they live, that their children can go to school where black children live. I think it is a poverty in the mentality of white South Africans.
All right, let's get a view from Thabo Mutle. I'll come back to you. Botsang, ANC Youth League NEC member. Thabo, thanks so much for joining us. Do you think this somehow strengthens NDZ's campaign in her rebuttal and responding to the comments by Johan Rupert?
The comments made by the fellow called Rupert, it is just an opportunistic statement that he made. I think they want to secure their own wealth. That is why they are critiquing this program of the African National Congress, because the aim and the sole intention of this program is to bring about change, and not change at the surface. Radical is rooting their system so that it accommodates black people. That is change that will bring about change in terms of the system of the economy, the patterns of ownership that we see today, so forth and so on, to accommodate black people, most importantly to see the majority of our people being in control of the economy. Therefore, that thing does not augur well with them because they know, in fact, the utterances that he has made reassures us that, in fact, the very same system they've applied when they have closed black people out, that they have perpetuated to enrich themselves. They are skeptical of the fact that the ANC wants to take the same route, empower black people, and ensure that they participate in the mainstream economy. To them, the ANC is touching them at the nerve. Where they are panicking, but we are resolute. We want to see that radical economic transformation taking place, because one of the reasons why we are where we are today is because our problem started in 1652 when white people landed here, and they took freedom of our people and land, and black people had to find a way to fight for themselves for two things. One is land and freedom. One has been achieved, which is freedom. The land issue is still a problem. It is not achieved. And without land, we know very well that land is at the center of the economy. Therefore, we will not achieve economic transformation if the land question is not yet addressed. Therefore, we agree with the program. We are resolute. We will not be deterred by this opportunistic statement. made by Rupert because they want to protect their own wealth.
Yeah, Tabo, just stay on the line. I mean, Swiso was talking about changing the policies and instruments of government to effect radical economic transformation. Because Johan Rupert is well decorated, loved all over the world, has got a number of awards, doctorates, and etc. That in that environment, amongst the international investors, from that point of view, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma is not necessarily a threat, because the very key of why things couldn't move before is that the policies are not advancing the inclusive
exactly.
economy.
Cindy, that's why I wanted to come in. I'm glad Fiso raised it, and Mr. Tsiani also mentioned that Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma sounds like he's a lone voice within the African National Congress candidates. Is the only one who's talking about this radical economic transformation. I want to hear Cyril Ramaphosa. I want to hear Lindiwe Sisulu. I want to hear all these other candidates, 8 of them for the first time in the history of the ANC, saying, I'm ready to be the president, and what are you going to do? One person is standing up and defending the black majority entirely to say, Johan Rupert, you are insulting the black nation. You cannot come and tell us that radical economic transformation is not key to this country. But again, Spencer is raising an issue of saying we want, or black people and our children wants to live like Johan Rupert, and we don't want to take from them. I'm actually differing with that. We must take from them. If we don't take from white people, we will never be where they are. We should never, as a black nation, strive to be like white people. It's wrong, Cindy. It's wrong for black people to say, I want my children to go and study and be like Johan Rupert's children. That's not what I want. Johan Rupert's children are benefactors of an illegal, inhuman system. And I don't want my children to be benefactors of an illegal, inhuman system, even corruption. I don't want that.
Yeah, but you want to give your children the economic choice to be able to study at whatever institution,
exactly, but
to travel,
we cannot do that. We cannot do that if we don't sit as government, and I want to come to the government part, and implement and or develop policies that are going to force arrogant people like Johan Rupert to realize that there is a black majority government in the country. It will develop and implement policies that will transform the lives of majority black people in this country. And we must concede, Spiso, that our government, as it is today, it has failed to address those issues. It has failed to force white people to reconcile with us. Instead, we are reconciling with them. We are being apologizing even for their wrongs. We are apologizing for wanting to
You're sharing the bicycle.
We are sharing the bicycle that they stolen from us. Instead of taking the bicycle and offering them a lift, they want to offer us a lift on a bicycle that they stole from us. And we should not accept that. The government must rise. The government of the Republic of South Africa, the democratic government, over 11 million people has voted that government into power to represent the majority interest of black people. It must come with policies that will radically transform. For Nkosazana Zuma to rise and say, we will radically transform, when the policies of government are talking the total opposite of what needs to happen, it will not help the situation.
Yeah. So you talk policy, but just take the mining charter, for example, and the ramifications there of the announcement of job losses in the sector and the court interdict. So even when government attempts to do that, there are certain confines that seem to still preserve what is currently happening in terms of the economy.
I think my larger deduction from this is that the policy needs to change, but we've always been saying that it's not a new thing. But there will be a lot of hostility in attempting to change policy, and that was a part of the connotations, part of the amendments, the agreements, the arrangements, the contracts that came from pre-democracy and leading up to the drafting of the Constitution. It would be very difficult to attempt to change anything in this country without the Constitution, because you'd be taken to court. We've seen that with Mr. Mosebenzi Zwane. People heading up to court to say, this mining charter is illegal, it cannot stand. And so I think the latter is to go back to the drawing board, which is fundamentally the Constitution, and look at the loopholes and the errors it might possess, to say, the puzzle that makes up the Constitution of South Africa, where does it misrepresent Africans? Where does it misrepresent the majority? And begin to correct it from there. But if we just take a stance to say, well, we're just going to take and we're just going to take the land, it will end up in court. the 5-year term will end and there will not be deliverables. We must go back to the first program. And the first program is the policy that this country runs by. It's called the Constitution. Until such time as the Constitution is amended and corrected, we cannot talk about repossession, because that repossession becomes illegal. And what is illegal, Mr. Tsiane will tell you, ends up in the court.
And I want to look at policy on one, and also the popular lexicon, in that, you know, for some reason, RET is now regarded as looting. In your view, is that racial profiling? Because we're talking about a black government, based on Rupert's comments.
Based on that, yes. The perception has been created all along that, you know, when blacks rise to any other occasion, whether they be directors, whether they be commissioners of SARS, whether they be SAA board directors, whether they be presidents of a country, they are corrupt. That perception has been ongoing for a period of more than 5 years. The perception that when AN7 is run by black people, it's corrupt. It's going to be pursuing something else less effective. Anything else that is black, anything else that would assume responsibility or rise to a power, let alone to amass wealth, it should always be viewed. And this has been ongoing for many years, ever since the ANC has taken power since 1994. It has been that perception that has been instigated at all times, that when they rise to that power, when they come to that position, they're corrupt all the time. And the frustration has now finally hit at Rupert. And this reflection, a reflection of majority of white people of South Africa. Whenever they see black people in general, when they are wealthy, they must have acquired their wealth through a corrupt means. That is what is happening. And if they come up with any other circumstances that ensue that there is a radical economic transformation, that is a corrupt mechanism of achieving wealth.
Yeah, very briefly.
Before we go, I just want to share this. And the reason why I always refer to the policy of this country and the Constitution is understanding all the debates we can make. We cannot expropriate the land without compensation until we change or amend Section 25 of the Constitution. Otherwise, any expropriation becomes illegal, which means our first step in radical economic transformation and expropriation must be the Constitution.
I think you've exhausted your privilege now in terms of time as group political editor. You've exhausted your privilege of being a regular.
This Section 25 thing, it is not true. One day we must have a discussion on how we can expropriate land without changing that part of the Constitution. Because the Constitution of this country says we are all entitled to land ownership and economic benefit.
You cannot be deprived of land. Okay, that's a discussion for another day. Thanks indeed, gentlemen. That's a group political editors, Fiso Mahlangu, Botsang Muilwa, political analyst, and Masiri Tsiane is the chairman of the South African Liberty Foundation. He's with Masiri Tsiane attorneys as well. Kalni House, MKMVA NEC member via Skype, and Thabo Motle, ANC Youth League NEC member. And to you at home, our most valuable panelists, thanks indeed for joining us. We're back after this.